Here is a major fact the mainstream media avoids in every story on world trade. America's goal, Donald Trump's goal for all of these trade wars you see going on is free and fair trade. Zero tariffs, zero restrictions. And when America succeeds in winning these trade wars, America will be much better off. If America can close our trade deficit gap by only 25%, which can be done by opening up these other countries to American products, America will gain 1% on our overall economic growth. Which means it'll go from about 4%, which is great, to over 5%, which may not seem like a lot, but let me break that number down to you simply. America, by gaining 1% on our overall economic growth, brings 10 million new jobs to America, brings $3 trillion worth of wealth to America, which means higher 401ks for retirees, more investment capital for more growth. So the war is worth fighting. Every time the mainstream media comes on and touts about how 800 people in Missouri may lose their job, always stop and think about this. This is opposed to 10 million new jobs being created and $3 trillion in wealth. That is worth the fight. America will win all of these trade wars because America is the buyer here. America is the party with the money. And it is a lot easier as the buyer to find another seller than it is as the seller to find another buyer. America will certainly win the trade war with China. While the left and the mainstream media want you to look at the details of the opening shots in the Chinese trade war, you need to take a step back and look at the overall scope of the Chinese trade war and trading in general between America and China. China exports over $500 billion a year worth of goods to the United States, while America exports less than $130 billion a year worth of goods to China. And many of these goods, about 30%, are actually components to be placed in the parts and the products that China is simply sending back to America. This $370 billion deficit, this alone is why America will not, in fact cannot, lose a trade war with China. It is a lot easier to find a seller than it is to find a buyer. Now couple that massive deficit with the fact that it was American investments into China over the last 4 decades that built this massive manufacturing industry in China. Who do you think paid for that huge Apple plant in China? That was an Apple investment capital. American dollars paid for those factories. This is where America has a nuclear option in this trade war. America can simply make it economically worthwhile to build new factories in Bangladesh, in India, in Vietnam. Or better yet, here on this side of the planet. How about we give a major tax cut and import incentives to countries like Colombia or Venezuela on this side of the world? If we improve these countries, that will help us with illegal immigration too. Now back to China. 88% of the Chinese overall trade surplus they have from the entire world comes from America. 88% of their entire exports relate directly to American trade. And China is an export-driven economy. And very much so. Let's get back to the overall picture of the trade war with China. America sits on a rock solid economic foundation. That basically means that the IRS and the press make sure that America's economic numbers are real and true. Meanwhile, in China, not so much. China sits on an economic foundation that is full of cracks. Moreover, outright manipulation by the government. Remember those ghost cities in China that the government built a few years ago? It is where China was literally building billion-dollar cities, the size and scope sometimes of Manhattan and Paris. The Chinese government spent billions of dollars on these massive construction projects. It kept the Chinese people working and grew the Chinese economy. But in the end, they achieved nothing. These cities now sit empty. The point is, there was no return on the investment. That's otherwise known as a waste of money. If and when America places real stress onto the Chinese economy, these cracks and other weaknesses will be exposed. And the Chinese know this. And they will back down as soon as Trump proves he is willing to watch China completely fail. Now on the details the mainstream media keeps bringing the conversation to. They fail to mention the most important one. The original Trump tariffs into China were placed on 4 key industries to specifically slow down Chinese overall worldwide growth in these 4 industries: robotics, aerospace, automobiles, and manufacturing. Now, these specific areas are where the Chinese have publicly announced as their 4 key areas to dominate the world by 2025. It is in America's best interest to slow these markets down for our future security, not to economically punish China. With China placing retaliatory tariffs aimed directly at American citizens to specifically meddle into American elections, they have opened the door to a true trade war. Trump will now be justified in whatever measure he deems fit. And it is also exposing what I have been ranting on for weeks, that Canada and the EU are doing the same thing, meddling in American elections. And meddling in American elections is absolutely wrong for any country to do, whether they be Russia, China, Canada, or any country in the EU. It is an act of war to meddle in American elections and should be punished. But I digress. The bottom line to this video is China depends on America a lot more than America depends on China. Moreover, it is in America's best interest to start spreading manufacturing around the world, to stop relying exclusively on Chinese manufacturers. American investment into factories in South America will not only help the nations in South America, it would help Americans' peace and security in the long term. So wake up here. Start thinking big picture. World trade is a big picture item. Do not lose the sight of the forest for the trees.